In this video, we're going to look at the use of a partial as it relates to utilizing that partial for model binding. So being able to actually take the model of a parent view and incorporating its data into your partial. So in the last video, we had looked at using the create screen to actually go ahead and create a user. This time, what I'd like to do is I'd like to use the same partial, which is now this form, and I want to incorporate it into my edit user form. So I'll start by adding a user. And we'll go ahead and hit submit. And that'll add our user. Then we want to be able to click edit here and edit that user. Now the first thing we need to do is actually set up our edit action to load the user that we're requesting. So to do that, we'll jump into Visual Studio and we will actually jump to our account controller and we'll minimize create. And we're going to focus on edit. Now in order to do the edit, what we're getting in as our get parameter is an ID. So we'll need to actually pull the user out of the user's DB context. And then we will do a user, and this will be our user DTO, and it'll equal context.users.first or default, and where x being the user, their ID equals ID. So the goal here is that we will grab that user out of the database using that ID field. Now we'll do a quick validation. We'll say if user is null. Then what we can do is we can say this dot model state dot add model error, no user found with this ID. And then we can just return view. And what that'll do is it'll load up the edit view, but it'll actually add that error to the view. This actually has a key value, so the key will be empty and the value will be our error message. So that's a quick validation, and then we have a user, and then what we'll do is we'll convert that into a user view model. So we'll do user view model. I'll just say UVM equals a new user view model. And then we'll quickly initialize that. And to do that quickly, I'm actually going to copy this code right here, which is copying our properties between the user and the user view model. And then in this case, all of our X's, I'm going to do a find replace here. So highlight, Control H, bring up the find replace box. So everywhere there's an X dot, I want to replace it with user DTO dot. And then I just like to do Alt A, and that'll replace all instances within the selection where I highlighted. There were 7, so I'll just accept those and hit save. So I didn't actually have to write any code. It just kind of took care of it through the find and replace and using an old chunk of code. And then from here we can return or pass the UVM user view model to our edit view. So we'll do that. We'll save. And then if we jump back to our view again, and we refresh, we then get our user data presented. So what I'd like to do is take this view and utilize our partial instead of it being just kind of tucked inside of this edit view. So if we jump back into our Visual Studio, if we jump to the edit view, you'll see that we have all of this form validation and all of our controls listed here again. I'd like to instead just use that partial, and then that partial will then pick up our model from this view. So the chunk that we're going to want to remove is the form horizontal div tag and all of its child items. A quick trick is if you're wanting to grab all of an item, you can actually shrink that div tag or whatever tag you're wanting to shrink, and then if you highlight the line, you can do that and then hit delete, and that'll delete everything. So that's a little quick handy way of doing that. So add html.partial, and the partial that we're looking for again is this one. So we're going to highlight that. I hit F2 to get into the name editing, Control C to copy, and then I'll come back to my view, paste, and now we have inserted that view. Now, since we didn't actually modify any of our controllers or our CS files, I should be able to just flip back to my view, back to my browser, and then refresh on this view. And you'll see now that everything is refreshed, and we now have this submit button listed instead of having the other button before. Now I'd like to also just kind of quickly modify this edit user screen to simply say edit. So we'll go ahead and just quickly make a modification to this particular view, since this view is our edit view, even though we're using that partial. And we'll refresh again. And you'll see by doing that, that the model that's being passed to our edit view is a user view model. Our partial also takes a user view model, and what's happening by design is that the model that's passed to our parent view is getting cascaded down to our partial, and the partial can take advantage of all the properties and values within that parent view. So that action of using a parent model inside of your partial is actually very simplistic. It's as long as your parent view and your partial utilize the same model, the same view model, then it's simply a matter of calling that partial using the html.partial, and you'll actually be able to load your form successfully utilizing the parent view partial. Where things start to get a little more complicated is when the partial has its own view model that's different than the parent, or maybe it's only using a property off of the parent view model in order to render the partial. And that's where we start to utilize things like our actions to render and pass our partials. And we'll discuss that in our next video.